Welcome to Beyond the Bin, a podcast about sustainability in healthcare. Hospitals generate millions of tons of waste each year, and most of it comes from single-use medical devices. From syringes, gloves, surgical gowns, and IV bags, disposable tools have become an integral part of modern healthcare. While these devices are essential for sanitation and convenience, they come at a steep environmental, financial, and ethical cost. In this episode, we will explore the true impact of medical waste. We'll unpack how our reliance on single-use devices burdens healthcare systems, deepens global inequalities, and affects developing countries the most. Our goal? To spread awareness and spark real-world solutions. Today, we'll dive into what single-use medical devices are, why they have become so common, and just how big their impact really is.
Let's rewind to the early 20th century. Before plastics took over, hospitals primarily used reusable tools such as sterilized glass syringes, stainless steel instruments, and woven cloth gowns. Although these materials were durable and sustainable, they required rigorous cleaning, sterilization, and a large infrastructure to support that process.
Then, in the 1960s, there was a revolution in plastics. Advances in polymer science allowed manufacturers to create lightweight, flexible, and inexpensive medical devices from plastic. Suddenly, it was possible to mass-produce syringes, tubing, catheters, and packaging materials that could be used once and discarded. The use of these new tools had the obvious appeal of fewer infections, less labor, and more convenience.
The introduction of plastic wasn't just convenient but transformative. Compared to metal or glass, plastics could be molded into just about any shape and were resistant to many chemicals and bodily fluids. This made them ideal for everything from blood bags to catheter tubes to microchip housing in diagnostic devices. Medical-grade plastics became the go-to material for innovation.
One of the biggest drivers behind the switch to single-use devices was infection control. In the mid-20th century, hospitals were facing rising concerns about cross-contamination. Disposable devices were offered as a simple and effective solution. Use it once, throw it away, and reduce the chance of transmitting infections between patients.
That became even more important in the 1980s and 1990s due to the HIV/AIDS crisis. The fear of blood-borne pathogens triggered a cultural shift in healthcare. The reuse of equipment, even if it was sterilized, felt too risky. Therefore, in order to ensure safety and avoid the risks, disposables became the symbol for safety.
And then decades later, in 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw another surge in disposable devices. The amount of disposable PPE, such as masks, gloves, and face shields, became lifelines that were used all over the world. However, necessary this may have been, they created a new tidal wave of plastic waste. Even COVID test kits, which many were used, are single-use plastic devices, and these contributed to the growing amounts of medical waste.
But it wasn't just infection control that led to the shift of disposable devices. There was also a strong economic argument. It also became cheaper to purchase disposable medical devices because running sterilization procedures often took time, energy, staff, and oversight. In order to prioritize savings and efficiency, hospitals began to adopt a widespread preference for single-use supplies.
And let's not forget the role of manufacturers in this transition. Starting in the late 1970s, companies began labeling certain items as single-use. Some of these devices were complex, which made it difficult to clean properly. However, they could have been reused with proper sterilization. Others were simply marketed as disposable, despite the fact that they could have been safely reused. The healthcare industry followed suit due to encouragement by marketing, legal liability concerns, and the desire for operational efficiency.
In some cases, reusing devices was still possible and even practiced. Ethylene oxide sterilization, for example, made it possible to safely reuse many tools. But as designs became more complex and more plastic dependent, reprocessing fell out of favor. The line between necessary safety and unnecessary waste began to blur.
All of this had serious consequences. Today, hospitals are among are among the largest institutional producers of waste, much of it non-biodegradable. A single surgery can generate up to 20 pounds of waste, most of it from packaging and disposables.
And the burden isn't equally shared. Wealthier countries can afford to use and discard massive quantities of supplies. But in developing countries, where resources are limited and waste management is underfunded, this culture of disposability creates both dependency and pollution. Some hospitals in low-income regions resort to unsafe reuse or have to rely on donations of surplus disposables from the global north.
Worse yet, most single-use medical devices aren't even recyclable. Even those made from recyclable plastic are often contaminated with blood or other biological material, meaning they often end up in landfills or are sent to incinerators. The carbon footprint of these items from manufacturing to disposal is becoming increasingly more worrisome. This worry is causing the need for a life cycle assessment, or LCA.
LCA is a method used to measure the environmental impact of a product from raw material, extraction, manufacturing, transportation, usage, and disposal. For many single-use devices, the environmental cost far outweighs the benefit, especially when reuse options exist.
So that's what started as a push for better safety and faster care, has created a system that's unsustainable and unethical in the long term. The medical world is now caught in a dilemma. How do we balance patient safety with environmental responsibility?
In future episodes, we'll explore promising innovations in sustainable healthcare, from reprocessing programs to biodegradable plastics, and policy shifts that encourage smarter procurement.
Thanks for joining us today on Beyond the Bin. If this episode opened your eyes to the hidden cost of healthcare waste, share it with your friend or colleague. Together, we can start meaningful conversations and push for more sustainable solutions.
This was episode 1, The Disposable Dilemma. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll dive deeper into the true price of disposability, from the environmental damage caused by plastic waste to the financial strain on hospitals and healthcare systems. Episode 2 unpacks the real-life toll of single-use devices. See you there.